Yes, it has started. Professor Subimal,
Okay.
you can start.
Oh, okay, thanks. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on your local time. I welcome you all to the panel discussion on climate resilient engineering design organized by the Interdisciplinary Programme in Climate Studies at IIT Bombay, funded by Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. This is actually the second of the series of panel discussions, and the first one was on scope for technology development and entrepreneurship in climate studies, and this is now uploaded in the YouTube. So first, let me give you a brief introduction to the program IDP in Climate Studies. I'd like to say that this is the first PhD academic program on climate change in India, which was set up in 2012 with the initial funding from SLICE, Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. And from 2012, we have made a tremendous growth in the sense like our IDP has at present 60 plus on-roll PhD students and 30 plus faculty members from 11 different departments. To give a flavor of interdisciplinary research to each and every PhD, we make sure that a student has two supervisors from two different departments. And in the research front also, we are making a lot of progress in terms of a lot of impactful research projects which are of national importance, and also a lot of publications specifically in high impact venues like nature climate change, nature sustainability, nature communications, science advances, PNAS, environmental research letter, geophysical research letter, and so on. Now coming back to the panel discussion, as you all know that climate resilience has become an important characteristic of any sustainable system. However, explicit consideration of the same in engineering design is still limited. And I feel that this is partly because we are unable to train our brilliant engineering students on climate resilience and sustainability. If these concepts are not explicitly considered in engineering design, they will still remain, they will remain a buzzword. They will not be properly considered in engineering design. And considering that fact, we plan to start a dual master's degree program very soon in our IDP climate studies for our own undergraduates. So, before designing such courses where, undergraduate students can have a master's program in climate science, and so that they can understand how to go for an engineering design which is climate resilient, or in what way they can use the climate services. So before designing such courses, we thought of, arranging this panel discussion with our esteemed panelists. And I'm sure that your suggestion and guidance will be really beneficial for developing such a non-conventional, but probably the most relevant course considering the present global issues. I once again thank all of you, the panelists, the attendees, the moderators for joining the discussion. The moderators of the panel discussions are Professor C Narayanan, Professor of Center for Technology Alternatives for Rural Areas, Sitara, and also the associate faculty member of our IDP, and Professor Arpita Mondal, Assistant Professor of Department of Civil Engineering, and also associate faculty of IDP. Actually, today I'm noticing a very interesting thing. Today, more than 50% of our panelists are actually women. And this is really great, specifically because this is the month of March when we celebrate Women's Day. So without wasting much of time, I welcome you all again, and over to you, moderator. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Subimal. I am C Narayanan. Good evening and good morning. First of all, I thank all panel members for your participation. I'll briefly introduce the topic, the relevance of it, and then go to the introduction of panel members. So the starting point of why we discuss climate resilient engineering design is that we are in the age of Anthropocene, a period during which human activity has been the dominant influence on climate and the environment. The acceleration to Anthropocene started with the giant strides in technology since Industrial Revolution. So this of course led to economic growth and enhanced quality of life. And this is the positive part of the story. So the first questioning of this was the insufficient distribution of growth across and within countries. And the second was the environmental challenge that fundamentally questioned the sustainability of this trajectory. So the concerns of sustainable development emerged from the 1980s that coincided with the period of the so-called neoliberal globalization, where increased accumulation at a global scale saw massive ecosystems damage with signs of climate change. So infrastructure is needed to spur growth that is supposed to be needed for poverty alleviation, especially in countries like India. However, the link is not so straightforward also. the link between growth and poverty elevation. But coming to engineering design, India is one of the countries with oldest modern civil engineering knowledge, with British establishing the first institution for teaching civil engineering in the world, the Thomson College, that now has become IIT Roorkee. And coming to water resource engineering, there are modern challenges to this discipline, especially to incorporate climate-induced disasters. For example, when you look at an issue like floods in Kosi Basin, there are engineers from both sides of Nepal and India who argue against the proposed high dam and also limitations of embankments as a lone strategy for flood control, which was the kind of paradigm that emerged in the 50s and 60s. Likewise, regarding the glacier melting in Himalayas, which is related to climate change, World Bank proposed more dams to harness what John Briscoe calls as windfall of water gains going to be accrued from this process. But with the latest catastrophes in Himalayas, this also remains a question mark. So are the existing engineering knowledge systems equipped to deal with newer challenges like climate change? That's what Professor Subimal actually kind of asked, and it's the right time to ask such a question. And since IIT Bombay is actually kind of venturing into this, academic program, also the master's program, I think it'll be good to, kind of ask these questions at this juncture. How can disciplines like civil engineering dialogue with environmental science, economics, and sociology to make designs more inclusive and sustainable? There are many such questions, and I won't exhaust the list. Now I invite Professor Mondal to introduce the panel members. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Narayanan. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Sheeba, would you be able to move the slides for me, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Warm greetings to everyone present here. My name is Arpita, and I work as an assistant professor in civil engineering and climate studies here at IIT Bombay. It's my pleasure to introduce this panel today, comprising of established and emerging thought leaders from different parts of the globe. Their accomplishments are many, yet I'll try to keep it brief in the interest of saving time for the discussion. I welcome Dr. Bhanu Neupane, who is the Program Specialist, Communication and Information Sector, UNESCO Paris. Dr. Neupane is trained on hydro systems, water resources management, and knowledge management. Graduate school may appear nightmarish to some of us, me included. However, for him, it must have been a piece of cake, for he has had not one, but 2 PhD degrees, the first in water resources management, and then later on business administration. Dr. Neupane started his career as a change agent for a GTZ-funded agricultural project in eastern Nepal in 1987. Prior to joining UNESCO in 2000, he worked as an expert in agriculture and natural resource management and served in several Southeast Asian countries. At the UNESCO, he served with the UN system-wide World Water Assessment Program. He was transferred to the UNESCO office in New Delhi in 2004, where he was made responsible for the implementation of the International Hydrological Programme. Currently, he is working for UNESCO as a program manager for information and communication technology and sciences and open access to scientific research. He is also a visiting professor engaging in teaching at different universities across the globe. Welcome, Dr. Bhanu Neupane. Next, we have with us today, and I hope she is able to join us soon, Dr. Jyoti Parikh, who is the Executive Director, Integrated Research and Action for Development, New Delhi. She was a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change, India, and is a recipient of the Nobel Prize for Peace, awarded to the IPCC authors in 2007. She served as the Senior Professor and Acting Director of Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, IGIDR, in Mumbai, 1986 to 2003. She also worked at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, Austria, for 8 years, and at the Planning Commission as Senior Energy Consultant at New Delhi. Recently, Dr. Parikh has been appointed as the advisor for Global Commission on Adaptation set up by UN Secretary General and Gates Foundation, managed by World Resources Institute. She is also a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda on Decarbonization of the Energy Sector. She has served as an energy consultant to the World Bank, the US Department of Energy, EEC, Brussels, and UN agencies, and as an environment consultant to UNDP, World Bank, and so on. She has guided 16 graduate theses, and she has been overseeing a USAID project on South Asian cross-border electricity trade for the last 6 years, which brought out 30 reports and organized 82 events from 2012 to 18. A very warm welcome to Dr. Jyoti Parikh. May I request all panelists, Professor NCN, if you can please mute your mic for now.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Right.
Now, I recently attended a panel discussion on climate change comprising of panelists who were all, incidentally, old-aged males, but they were generous and gracious to point out two striking observations. The first, the lack of diversity in that particular panel, and the other, more ironically, these leaders won't be facing the worst outcome of climate change in their remaining lifetime. So a conversation on climate change cannot exclude the young generation. And today we have with us not one, but three young and very bright academics, two of whom are joining us today from the two coasts of America and one from India. We have Dr. Deepti Singh, an assistant professor in the School of Environment in Washington State University. Prior to joining WSU, she was a postdoctoral fellow at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory of Columbia University. She did her PhD in Environmental Earth System Science from Stanford University, working with the very renowned climate scientist Dr. Noah Diffenbach. Dr. Singh's research interests are focused on the intersection of physical climate and human vulnerability to assess climate risks to society. She combines climate dynamics with statistical approaches to examine the influence of historical and future climate forcings on the characteristics of climate extremes and their associated physical processes on a range of spatiotemporal scales. Interestingly, Dr. Singh has an old connection with IIT Bombay. After her mechanical engineering degree in Pune University, she worked here in IIT Bombay on a project with Dr. Sudarshan Kumar in the Aerospace Engineering Department. Welcome, Dr. Deepti Singh. Next, we have Dr. Julia Hopkins, who is an assistant professor at Northeastern University in Boston, studying the physical underpinnings and design parameters of nature-based solutions for climate-changed coastal communities. After finishing her PhD in the MIT WHOI Joint Program in 2017, she spent 3 years in the Netherlands to investigate sand-based flood protections at the TU Delft. Last year, she returned to Boston, Massachusetts, and she used this experience of working in the Netherlands as a co-founder of the nature-based coastal infrastructure startup called the Emerald Tutu, which has recently been granted an NSF funding grant. As faculty at Northeastern, her research focuses on adapting nature-based resilience solutions to the varied coastal communities of the world. A very warm welcome, Dr. Julia Hopkins. And last, but certainly not the least, we have Dr. Udit Bhatia, who is an assistant professor in civil engineering discipline at the Indian Institute of Technology, Gandhinagar. His research interests include the recovery and resilience of network systems, uncertainty assessment in hydroclimate extremes, and physics-guided data sciences. Dr. Bhatia received his PhD in interdisciplinary engineering from Northeastern University in Boston. His research has been highlighted by national and international media and publications, including Science Daily, AAA's Eureka Alert, R&D Magazine, Yahoo, and Big Data Journal. He is a co-author of the book Critical Infrastructures, Resilience, Policy, and Engineering Perspectives, published by Taylor and Francis. His work in applied network science, infrastructure, resilience, and extreme value analysis is currently being used by policymakers at various levels, and it has also earned him a US patent in his name. His work informs different disciplinary and interdisciplinary venues, UNA UK reports, encyclopedia articles, and peer-reviewed book chapters. Welcome, Dr. Udit Bhatia. With this introduction, we may now begin the panel discussion. I'm a little clumsy with remembering type. Yeah. I'll conclude now by.
I'm not sure we're able to not find out the reason. So.
Hey, Raaj, can you please mute your mic?
Yes, ma'am. 1 minute, ma'am. Yeah, you can just log out and then. completely you can log out.
Okay, I think Raaj is trying to help Dr. Parikh log in. Now, with this introduction, we may now begin the panel discussion. And I am a little clumsy with remembering titles, so therefore I will be addressing all of you by your first names, if that's okay. Let us first hear some thoughts on what climate resilience means to each one of you. And
yeah,
you may
now
about
I'm just
2
sending
minutes.
you one reminder, ma'am, to you.
And after Raj finishes, we can
for link
begin
only.
with
You can just see
Bhanu.
whether in that have you got it from the WebEx.
I was wondering, if it is a good time to start, or let us.
Just now I sent you.
I'll try to call him. But
I'm calling him.
Trying to call him, but he's on call already.
Right.
Oh, ma'am, 1 minute.
Just give me the cue and I'll start.
Yeah, 1 minute, ma'am.
Sheeba, you are the host. Can you please mute him? No, he's the host, so we can't mute him.
Yeah, ma'am. I'm trying to do. Yeah, he has muted himself. Okay.
Okay, great. So yes, let's begin with you, Bhanu.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Mondal or Arpita. Yes, you want to use the first name, maybe I should take the same liberty and address you by your first name. Thank you so much. And before I begin, I would like to express my thanks not only to you, but also to Subimal and IIT Mumbai for inviting me to this very esteemed panel discussion. In my view, climate resilience can simply be defined in a very textbookish context, and simply say that climate resilience is the ability of average weather in a given area over a longer period of time to rebound back to its original state following a shock such as a hazard or a disaster. But this will be extremely limiting in a number of ways, as climate defines our lives, livelihood, and existence. Climate resilience now carries a much broader connotation and includes whether or not our lives and livelihood, and in some cases, as for people living in marshes, for example, the very existence, whether or not they can rebound back after any shock that may happen in the environment. It's a matter of concern for governments, cities, villages, and common people at large, whether or not they can rebound back to status quo ante after the protuberance is gone. It is an extremely important issue that defines how climate-related variables will behave after the shock, especially can the system and entities that rely in that system can recover back to its original state. Climate resilience views significance from how we want the ecosystems that we live in to perform, to whether or not the very ecosystem that we have contributed to evolve can cope with the perturbance or not. It takes our preparedness, our ability to pay for it, our governance system to cope with it, and willingness for adaptation. It allows us to deconstruct part of climate change, analyze each component, and foster understanding of the makeup of the whole system. I'd like to be very brief on this intro question, given the fact that climate resilience and speaking to a bunch of PhD students, it's a no-brainer, and I would like to stop there, given the fact that I think the next part of the discussion will be much more interesting and much more engaging. So I'll stop here, and I would like others to maybe chip in.
Thank you, Bhanu. Deepti, please share your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Arpita, and thank you to everybody for the invitation to be part of this panel. I am excited to virtually be back at IIT Bombay. I was there almost over a decade ago, so I don't know if I'm still considered young. Anyway, so my thoughts on resilience, I have very similar thoughts to Bhanu. So I generally think of climate resilience as like preparedness of society for a range of weather conditions, right? We're like our climate is changing, and will our systems be able to keep up to the disasters and the weather conditions that we're likely to see in this changing climate? And resilience also to me means that we can respond to disasters. So we're gonna always have disasters, right? We've always had weather-related disasters in the past. We're going to continue to have them in the future, and a resilient society would be one that can recover quickly from a disaster and maybe minimize the impact of these disasters through preparing for their occurrence. I think an important part of that is also being able to predict these disasters, because ultimately we can plan for a changing climate, but the planning for a changing climate involves developing our infrastructure to do that, but prediction, seasonal to subseasonal predictions, can help us manage the disasters better. So to me, climate resilience is both infrastructure development and society preparedness for disasters, for a changing climate, but also the ability to predict extreme conditions.
Thanks, Deepti. Julia?
Hello. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you so much for that kind introduction. And it's really wonderful to hear all of these thoughts and to have a discussion moving forward. My brief take on climate resilience, echoing some of the things that have been said previously, is definitely the ability of communities and society at large to adapt to what is coming in the climate-changed world, which requires a combination of being able to more effectively predict what's going to be coming, as well as the error bars around our predictions, and also a recognition of the fact that we've effectively been engineering this world for a very long time, and what we sort of need to do moving forward is continue our desire to engineer and innovate, but do it with more of a sense of what the unintended consequences are likely to be. So a sense of climate resilience is also a sense of how we adapt to the coming climate era while understanding the repercussions of whatever our choices might be as we look to prepare. And this involves both looking at the consequences to the natural environments that we are currently existing in, as well as the consequences to communities that exist right now, what their needs are and what they might need in terms from governments or from us as engineers moving forward to create a new kind of community infrastructure and society that works for everyone currently existing in areas that are going to be impacted by climate change, which is most places in the world. And as a last bit, and this might be somewhat unique to the United States, but also other parts of the world, is a willingness to pay to be prepared. So not only to predict what's coming, but also to acknowledge that there's a lot of benefit in putting forth the infrastructure and the plan for resilience, even if you don't see the immediate benefit.
Very well said, Julia. Udit, please share your thoughts on this.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Arpita, and I'm always glad to be here, connect back to IIT Bombay. I mean, even my connection goes back to undergrad days.
Right. I should have mentioned that too.
Yeah. So whenever I hear the word resilience, the first thing that comes to my mind as systems engineer and somebody working in networks is an opportunity to build the social and natural networks in a way that are not only prepared to absorb shocks that both natural and man-made events are going to throw at them. And, when we talk about natural disruptions as well as man-made disruptions, they are here to stay. But specifically in context of natural hazards, climate change is definitely going to be an exacerbating force on that. So for us, it's an opportunity to build even better system, which takes me to the definition of anti-fragility, that whenever given an opportunity, how we can not only bounce back to an expected state, but even surpass that and design systems that can configure themselves when they are subjected to perils of related magnitude. So that's how I always envision this concept of resilience, which is more of system-centric approach rather than an individual component-centric approach.
Thank you so much, Udit. So now we'll keep alternating between Professor N.C. Narayanan and me. So, NCM, would you like to take over? Yes.
Arpita, yes. Dr. Parikh has just joined. So.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh, that's very good. Yeah, we are glad. So, my questions are to Dr. Jyoti Parikh and Dr. Bhanu. In your opinion, are the existing engineering designs in different sectors climate resilient? Can you highlight some of the upcoming developments and examples in this area in the global and regional context? You can take 5 minutes each. I think Dr. Jyoti can. Yeah.
I'm sorry it took some time to connect for some reason. Yes, thank you very much for inviting me here. And, climate change is getting now all pervasive, and it is affecting practically every aspect of our lives. And if we start with, let's say, consumer goods, then norms and standards for air conditioning, refrigerators, and so on would have to be different. If you look at the public infrastructure, such as power system, digital connections, everywhere there would be different engineering design, or at least the standards would have to change. For example, in power generation, because of the higher temperature, thermodynamic efficiency will reduce. Even solar energy, there may be at high temperature, solar efficiencies are low. Wind patterns will change, so wind patterns have to be different. Now, with increasing, so that's one of the heat-related issues. But also there are issues related to extreme events, which could be cyclones, floods, earthquakes. Not earthquakes, cyclones, floods, many heat waves and so on. Even the town plan and droughts and so on. Town planning would have to be different, because when so much water falls, we are not even following the usual norm of town planning of having 20% area on every road for stormwater drainage. Now, stormwater drainage is a thing which will keep our cities from flooding, and we don't even follow that 20% norm, and maybe even needed to be increased further. Now, building bylaws is another aspect where it is not only necessary to make them strong and heat resistant, but also for comfort level, we need different types of materials even, which can last longer and which can cool us. So the whole issue then becomes also of that of legal issue, because we are looking at bylaws, designing new standards, and social awareness, behavioral issues, and so on. So it is really becoming very much.
Dr. Parikh, I think there is some connectivity issue. You may switch off your video if that helps the bandwidth a little bit.
I think she's still on. Yeah, she's back. Can we go to Dr. Bhanu and come back? Yes, Dr. Bhanu, do you want to start now? You got the questions?
Thank you, but it feels a bit odd for me to just come in between. But anyways, I can.
Sorry for that.
Is it okay for me to start?
Yeah. Again.
Okay. No, in fact, no. I think she's still speaking.
Let me see.
No, I just now finished. I finished now.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, Dr. Bhanu, you can come in now.
Thank you very much, Professor Narayanan. But the response might require deconstructing your question first. I just want to ask everyone: are engineers aware that we live in a very interesting world? But at the same time, we will also live in a world that is full of enormous contradictions. We have extreme wealth and extreme poverty. The webinar is full of an audience consisting of a very well-educated people who may already know that if you take Africa, polar region, small island development state, and a large part of ocean, approximately 71% of the planet is already suffering because of climate change. WHO estimates that between 2030 and 2050, climate change would lead to about 250,000 additional deaths each year. And perhaps many engineers in continental Asia must be listening to our talk, from gas-guzzling, centralized air conditioning rooms, without realizing that millions living in the marshlands of Bangladesh may soon be grappling with annual flooding, or those who are living in Kibera in Kenya may just have a trap over their heads to save themselves from crippling heat. So three systems, essentially. The world economy, society, and the planet's physical environment are witnessing unprecedented failure because of climate change that threatens the very future of humanity. Technology, obviously, is an enabler of human progress, and engineers are a harbinger of human progress. I must give you a round of applause for being engineers, who are in fact changing the world. Technological advances such as the development of microchip, the World Wide Web, and the Genome Project are nothing short of a revolution for humanity. We have started to witness many breakthroughs vis-a-vis climate change, climate change as well, taking place in different corners of the world. From global level, there are a few path-breaking innovations that have taken place. First one is on monitoring climate. Now, global circulations are better sensed than ever before. Subimal and his team, does fantastic modeling, and these advances are like next to none, in the whole world. With computers becoming faster, these models that Subimal and his teams are developing can do magic in the sense that we are understanding climate much better. Our ability to simulate climate has definitely improved because of this. Earth is better sensed from space, and in situ coverage of hydrometeorological measurements have also improved. Self or solar powered sensors have become available for continuous real-time monitoring. Not least, they have also become affordable for deployment. The paradigm for citizen science have also changed, where people with none or some knowledge of engineering have started to contribute to better understanding climate and thus improve climate resilience. Yet the degree to which these technologies are being used for engineering design is far from satisfactory. I must note this. New materials such as porous pavements have been developed, but its use in highways in India is extremely limited. And India is being one of the leaders from among developing countries in the world. Green building design is not yet the norm in many cities. For example, right now, if you build a new home in Paris, it's mandatory that you have to provide space to green the roof. Such provisions are not there, and of course, several things have been invented, but the use in engineering design is far from adequate. I'm not too sure, whether you are aware, but I think, many of you may be aware that American Society of Civil Engineers in 2018 had, in fact, published a very beautiful book on resilient infrastructure, which spoke about adaptive design and risk management. But I'm not sure if even 5% of the engineers in developing countries even know about its existence. And then about the standard, which are essentially utilized. Globally, things are but changing. But I should be blunt that things are moving at snail pace in developing countries. As a tangent, I must note that the engineers who developed Paris metro system in 20th century, that is almost 100 years ago, were particularly unaware of the accessibility needs of the persons with disabilities. As a consequence, only 3%, that is only 9 out of 303 metro stations in Paris are totally accessible. This is basic engineering blunder. And this makes navigating through the city a nightmare for almost 2 million people with disabilities who are living in Paris region alone. The society is still bearing the consequence of decision which was taken some 100 years ago. In the same vein, if we juxtapose the similar sort of reality now in our part of the world, if the new climate resilient design standards have failed to become a norm for our infrastructure development processes, we may have to suffer for the next 100 years or more to come. Sadly, it may be too late for many of us. In sense, our ability to prioritize vulnerability has definitely improved. However, it is still a matter of debate if designs do take note of the uncertainty of climate or still based on classical engineering theory that was based on stationarity. Engineering designs have started to take into consideration of the interdependencies, which is, I think, manifested by the Interdisciplinary Center, which has been established at IIT Bombay. Again, the understanding is there that if one part of the system fails, there will be this failure can in fact can onset a cascade of failure across the system. A small example could be a hydropower station that got damaged because of the glacier outburst flood last month. Did those who designed the project had taken note of the fragility of the slope or on the existence of a glacier lake on the upstream areas? I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure whether some of the glaciers they were put through some of the analysis which is at the fingertip of most engineers. There is an increased realization that multi-purpose infrastructures are more effective, such as interbasin transfer or use of dam, not only for power generation, but also for natural defenses against floods. My final point would be a lot of progress has happened in achieving carbon reduction, and that engineers have started to take infrastructure as a system of systems. But again, these things have become a norm only in the countries of the north, and the countries of the south are barely late adapters of different technologies. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done, but I think there has been progress across the board. Thank you.
Yeah, I joined as audio, so we can just. I don't know if you are hearing now.
Yes, we can hear you now properly.
Yeah, so maybe I stay in audio mode.
Yes. Thank you. Dr. Parikh, would you like to add anything to your answer? Because for the last part of your answer, we couldn't hear you properly. Would you like to add some of the upcoming developments and examples in the area of climate resilient design? Some examples, would you like to share?
Yeah, I was also saying about the town planning. I don't know if that was heard. On stormwater drainage, we are not even following existing, the norms of town planning, also building bylaws. So that way we are increasing our problems. The other thing is also we have to develop alert systems very well, and so that at least the whenever there is heat stress, people are not out there. And surprisingly, we find that those kind of deaths are increasing, and there is a definition now of heat stress where consistently above certain degrees for 3 days, 5 days, they have all different health and even death consequences. Of course, I mentioned the appliance standards and so on. So we should think of solutions also in the solution cases. It's not just engineering designs alone, but also taking people along, finding community solutions, finding, educating people how to manage in a climate-friendly ways and what is actually happening. And as already mentioned, we may have already made many for power system reliability. Let's say we already always have mix of so much hydro, so much solar, so much wind, so much coal. So some is base load, some is peak load. And each of this kind of balance that we have, which is with the current kind of climate, will change because of different availability of different times and also unpredictable availability of different energy sources. Even the grid balancing would be harder to do. We are already, for more renewable energy, we are looking for now flexible coal such that we use solar during the day, and normally coal in India at least we were using as base load. But now with the renewable energy coming in a big way, coal will have to also shut down, at least back down for making room for solar and wind. So these many things are changing and need to change also.
Thank you, Dr. Parikh. And then we have a follow-up question, but I think we may move on and let all the panelists.
Arpita, just to kind of wind up this round, I would like to flag a question for Dr. Bhanu, because he started and ended with the kind of, this ecosystem people kind of an argument, large numbers of people will be affected. And then equally you told about some strides in, technology and also. So is there a way to kind of mold this so that, it can address this larger populations, I think that may be one issue that we can take up during the discussion later. Is there a way of bridging?
I agree with that. In fact, it will be a good idea after we hear from other panelists, and then come back to that question a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Arpita, you can go to the next round now.
Thank you. Yeah. So my next question is to Deepti and Julia. So the engineering sector experts find it difficult to consider climate inputs in engineering design, given a large uncertainty in observations, attribution statements, and even projections. So how can this be addressed, and what could be some possible guidelines for this? Deepti first.
Sure. Thanks for the question. I wanted to start by just maybe giving a slight introduction of what those uncertainties are in our climate projections, specifically talking about climate projections, because that's ultimately what defines climate, will help inform climate resilience. So we have mainly three sources of uncertainty, right? We have scenario uncertainty, which is, how is the world going to progress, which will ultimately determine what factors influence our climate. And there's some uncertainty related to the climate models that we use to make these projections. No model is perfect. We have over 40 climate models that are used to make climate projections. And then the third one is natural climate variability. So there's just some variability within the climate system that is inherently irreducible. So we can even if we think that we know what scenario the world is going to progress on, and if we have a perfect model, we're still going to have some uncertainty that we have to deal with. And I think it's part of it's the responsibility of climate scientists to maybe clearly communicate that uncertainty and quantify that uncertainty. There's a tremendous amount of work that climate scientists do in quantifying uncertainty, quantifying all these sources of uncertainty, but particularly recently there's been a pretty large push towards quantifying this irreducible uncertainty in the climate system. Because we, for example, might say that, well, in the future, the Indian monsoons might get wetter, but there might be natural climate variations that might lead to the opposite trend for the next few decades. And that's something we have to plan for, right? And so but like uncertainty is something that we kind of people deal with on a regular basis, and engineers are even better equipped to deal with uncertainty. Like we deal with it because, when we look at the weather forecast and we have some chance of it raining, right? We plan for that. We take an umbrella if there's even a 40% chance of it raining, at least I do. And then engineers, account for uncertainties in their design. And so it is our responsibility as climate scientists to provide that information, the best possible information that we can provide in terms of the range of climate conditions that they need to plan for. For a dam, that might mean providing projections of floods and droughts, and we might have a small likelihood of it. In a certain part of India, we might have a small likelihood of it getting drier, but a high likelihood of it getting wetter. And I think a resilient design would incorporate that uncertainty, so it would not fail irrespective of where we fall within that range of uncertainty. And then I think when we're thinking about incorporating uncertainty, there's also to think about the timescale on which we're talking about, right? So near-term climate predictions are going to be more uncertain. They have a larger range of natural climate variations, and slightly longer-term projections might have lower uncertainties in sort of the overall response of the climate system. So there's that timescale issue, then there's the uncertainty issue, and so we try to. I think the best we can do is try to plan for that, but it's something we need to incorporate, and and understand the sort of types of uncertainty that we need to plan for. And one thing I kind of, if you don't mind me adding, if I have a couple more minutes, I think for India, for South Asia in general, there is a lot of uncertainty in just, irrespective of these sources of uncertainty that I mentioned, the climate system is affected by several different factors. Like India is kind of unique in that where we have, of course, the effect of increasing greenhouse gases, but we also have anthropogenic aerosols or air pollutants that are affecting the climate system, and we have irrigation. So a lot of researchers at IIT Bombay are trying to understand how different aspects of the climate system respond to this. So there's some uncertainty there, and that will affect climate predictions in the near term. At the end of the 21st century, we know that greenhouse gases are probably going to be the largest driver, but in the near term, we do have to incorporate some of the uncertainty that comes from understanding how these factors affect our system. And I guess there's still a lot of research to be done there, but I think IIT Bombay has all the people they need to address that question.
Thank you, Deepti. Yes, Julia.
Hi, I apologize in advance. There's a little bit of construction happening outside this. So if you hear a ladder being unfurled, that's what's happening. But I sort of wanted to build. Can you hear me? Yeah.
The construction noise is fine, but your own voice is a little feeble. If you can speak closer. Thank you.
Yes. Let me know if this is better. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So I think I would like to continue with that theme of climate uncertainty, both sort of a short-term idea of climate uncertainty, and a more longer-term view of what we do and do not know and how we might try to design around that. And I sort of look at it through the lens of engineering solutions that are, quote, fast versus slow. And a lot of my examples are going to be from the coastal sphere because that's usually where I work. I work with coastal flooding and coastal communities and urban centers and rural centers that sort of abut oceans of various forms. But even those have a lot of examples of areas where we need very fast solutions now because things are happening that need to be taken care of. And these designs that need to be incorporated into these fast solutions aren't going to have all of the information available that we'll have in, say, 5 or 10 years, owing to continued investment in climate science and in basic research that are helping to better expand and also narrow the error bars of our climate simulations and our understanding of what's going to happen when, say, sea levels rise and coastal storms intensify, both of which are very likely possibilities. So there's the fast solution, which is a consideration because it doesn't have all the information available and operates under a larger amount of uncertainty and needs to go up now. For instance, Florida, Miami, it's getting nuisance flooding basically daily, and then a hurricane hits, and the hurricanes are coming more and more frequently, and they're much more intense. And many of the communities in Florida need solutions that exist now, as opposed to in the future when we can sort of get a better sense of how to figure these things out. And then there are longer-term solutions involving the more general idea of sea level rise. For instance, in the Netherlands, the country will be even more underwater. It has a little bit of time to prepare for this, but it's an inevitability that's going to be coming, and it's sort of trying to work within the scope of creating designs that can adapt to future conditions as they get worse and worse. So it's a very difficult question of how to engineer something that's supposed to be immediately present to deal with the immediate problem, but then also be impactful and efficient and successful in the future when the problem conditions are likely to have changed. And I agree with Deepti that one of the first things is to acknowledge that this uncertainty does exist. And I'm actually really happy that engineering disciplines are starting to do that because that's a really big part of the problem. Acknowledge that we have these large error bars, and thus our designs probably won't be perfect. We need to include more safety factors than we normally would. And even then, there's this idea of maintenance. Once the design is put in place, once we build it, once we develop it, once we make that seawall or put that jetty in or nourish that beach, assume conditions are going to change. The beach is going to erode, the seawall is going to be overtopped, the jetty is going to cause unintended consequences by eroding a nearby beach or degrading a nearby marsh, and you need to be willing to go back in and change the design and rework whatever you had there. So I think for the fast solutions, part of it might be maintenance, acknowledging that whatever design you have right now isn't going to be the best design for the future. It might be, but there's a good chance that it's not going to be, and you just can't know immediately what that best design should be. So you should put in place what you have and then be willing to go back and rework it when the time comes. And then for longer-term solutions, it definitely involves a sense of learning more from how natural environments adapt to uncertain conditions, because they are also going through this process of adapting to rising seas and warming temperatures and more intense storms. And some of them are doing things differently than what we would expect, and some of them are not adapting as well. We want to be able to study these natural systems to learn how they're adapting and seeing what lessons we can pull to actually fortify, for instance, our own coastlines or our own urban systems. An example is that many urban coastal cities are built on reclaimed marshland. The marshland itself would adapt, not easily, but it would adapt to coming climate conditions. Not perfectly, but it would get there. The cities, however, are somewhat immutable objects that don't quite have the same amount of bandwidth when it comes to dealing with these changing conditions. So one idea is then to think about how to build around a city so you start to turn it a little bit more into a marsh, a little bit more into the situation that allows a marsh to adapt, as in plants that can grow and can build sort of structural layers of soil to match rising sea levels, or just more porous living shorelines that can absorb some of the waters coming in both from the ocean and from the inland rivers. So all of these are possible examples, but in effect, I like to think of it as a combination of fast solutions that need to be adapted over time and slow solutions that we can look at as more nature-inspired ways of dealing with the problem. And of course, now that these two things are perfect, and it's a very difficult problem, but a discussion that is worth continuing and thinking about as we go through design.
Thank you. Those are really relevant thoughts for Mumbai as well, because we have a large part of Mumbai metropolitan region, which is called Navi Mumbai, and that part of the city is entirely built on reclaimed marshlands. So it's very relevant for us too. Over to you, NCN.
Yeah, I also really like that last part of it, nature-inspired design. I think, we'll come back to the challenges of that also later. What are the kind of knowledge systems then need to be kind of integrated for that? So the last round of question is, we are asking this larger question with concerns of economic growth as central and infrastructure the major route to this growth, which is a global concern. How can we make engineering design environment and climate friendly? I'm again telling, there is at one level, there is the pressure of economic growth for all countries, and then there is the pressure of environment and climate friendly pathway of development, which needs an engineering design to kind of suit that. So based on your work and research, how do you see this as a trade-off, or are there other ways of approaching it? And this is an open question to all members. You can take 2 minutes each. Thank you.
So, maybe since the line is available, I'll go now.
Yes, please.
You hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So, no, I think that many infrastructure has a lifetime, and what we build today will have to survive. Let's say if it's solar power plants, 25 years, coal power plants, but 30, 40, 50 years, and so on and so forth. Some things have 10 years lifetime, 5 years lifetime. So I agree with Julia Hopkins thing about taking the long-term view. But at the same time, it's not just about engineering, it's about cost also. So for what probability do you invest how much? So, it could be very, very highly costly infrastructure that saves maybe a couple of, damages. Or do we, especially if it's lives, it's very difficult to decide this. So that is one issue which is very critical. The legal aspects of it, the economic aspect of it, and social acceptance of what is acceptable and what's not. You also mentioned that economic growth versus environmental sustainability. I would say that it is not just we are all in it together, and there is certain things about carbon quota and carbon budgets for every country, and we have not used as much carbon budget over the last 30 years. I'm counting from 1990 onwards, and we should look at the cumulative emissions of the pathways, and then each country, and there are some countries who have emitted 5-6 times more. So now we are now new narratives is coming up. Of course, Paris Agreement, we have made commitments, but the new narrative is also net zero. How countries, even industries, so many industries have promised to be net zero, means that whatever they emit, it would be coming from, they will not emit total emission, their emissions would be limited to zero by switching to renewable energy, energy efficiency, and also some offsets through plantations or purchasing it from poor countries, but that the last part of it would be less and less over the time, and it would be mainly energy efficiency, renewable energy, and behavioral change. And I think here the digital revolution has really helped us, and we can really avoid much of the transport that we used to project 20 years back how much, people have to go by car and so on. And we lived with this because of COVID-19 without moving out of our houses. I know it was not easy for everyone, but digital transformation can go a long way in managing our systems. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Bhanu?
Yes, in fact, I would like to take up one specific part of that question, where you have essentially, spoke about sustainability. In fact, from 2015, I think international community embarked on a different journey altogether. Sustainable development goals became the central, development path for the whole world. 17 goals were adopted, and international community, fraternity, so their commitment towards sustainable development agenda, which included climate change as one of the areas, and with certain established goals. If we examine Goal 13, which is primarily on climate change, like after 6 years on, let me speak very plainly, we are failing big time. So whether we are advancing and trying to achieve, something that is good for the world, or we are in fact, like regressing, and maybe, things will change, given the fact that there has been a regime change in United States, but maybe that the dividend of, this regime change will be realized, a little later. Professor Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia University in end of 2018, he published a report called Sdg Index and Dashboard, in which he actually has said that including climate change, there is no one country on track toward achieving all sustainable development goals. For some countries in conflict, in fact, there is a reversal in SDG progress. In fact, instead of gaining, moving toward achieving these goals, they are in fact moving away from it. The progress towards sustainable consumption and production pattern is too slow. So, in fact, what the world are committed in doing in 2015, we're essentially doing something totally against it. It's not only the developing countries, who are at fault on this one. High-income countries have also obtained lowest score on Goal 12, which is on sustainable consumption and production. Goal 14, which is on life below water, which is like on ocean resources. In fact, all high-income countries have scored, absolutely terrible. Their performance is very poor. Many countries generated significant environmental, economic, and social security spillovers that undermine other countries' effort to achieve sustainable development goals. So, in fact, like some countries are getting progress, but at the cost of, some other countries. So there is something, fundamentally going on that one country's progress is kind of, upsetting the progress that could have been achieved in other countries. For Goal 13 on climate change, out of all G20 countries, only one presented a 2-degree temperature rise scenario compatible with COP21 scenario consensus. So I'm not too sure whether we have done something good, or in fact, we are in fact faltering all across the board. Given the fact that if we realize climate change in total, we'll have to take into consideration Goal 6, which deals with the clean water and sanitation. We'll have to take care of, also take into consideration of Goal 7, which is about affordable and clean energy. Goal 9 is about industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Goal 11 is about sustainable cities and communities. Goal 12, responsible consumption and production, which I said. And then Goal 14, which is life below water. Goal 15, life on land. And then, finally on Goal 17, which is about, cooperation. So it looks like, like we are essentially not walking our talk. So there is something, fundamentally different that we have to do, and maybe engineering community can somehow, up the ante and do something, like dramatic to bring the course of, progress, back to where it should be. Thank you.
Maybe Deepti, you can continue.
Sure.
Dr. Deepti, sorry, I was on mute.
Oh, that's okay. So do you want me to go?
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay. So Bhanu and Jyoti already gave some really important perspectives on this. So I'll speak, based on my perspective as a climate scientist who studies extreme events. One of the things we know for certain is that extreme events are likely to become more frequent across a lot of India and most of the world, right? And these extreme events have major costs on society. We saw that most recently with the flooding in Uttarakhand, where close to 70 people, I think, lost lives, and these kind of events have major costs to society. So for infrastructure development to not consider this is just going to result in more costs. So I think it makes sense to plan for plan for these kind of extreme events and plan for a have climate-friendly designs, because it'll actually ultimately reduce the cost to society when these kind of extreme events occur under climate change. One of the things that, maybe this isn't directly speaking to your question, but I wanted to bring up this perspective. So it kind of builds on what Bhanu was saying. Part of planning for or designing our society for climate resilience or making it climate friendly is not just caring about infrastructure that serves middle and high income communities, but for infrastructure and society to also ensure that low income communities that are most vulnerable, that we depend on, we don't necessarily see as much, but we depend on in several ways, and it's an important part of our society. The climate design should incorporate the systems that serve them, and then the other point I wanted to make was also, when we think about designing society for climate resilience, we also need to consider not just the physical systems, but also the response to extreme weather events and disasters. And that includes things like healthcare systems that are needed when we have flooding disasters or heat waves that have to ultimately respond to extreme events. And then disaster management. So like we saw with the Uttarakhand flood, the disaster response team was really helpful in protecting a lot of people that were affected by this, and kind of continuing to build that and incorporate that into our system design and into our systems is going to be important. And the costs associated with it, and this came up earlier as well, the costs associated with it, but it makes sense for us to incorporate these elements into it, because ultimately it will reduce the costs and the impacts that our society experiences.
Thank you. Dr. Julia?
Yeah, so just building on what's been said previously, one of the really interesting things about engineering design as it remains right now and as it's building as a component of how we tackle climate change is that validated numerical models of the performance of these designs are actually becoming something that people are listening to in terms of information that they take in when they decide whether or not to incorporate a specific design. And so one of the potential ways of tackling the economic versus impact trade-off of climate resilient designs is to put economic models into our physical models when it comes to understanding how a particular design, be it fully gray infrastructure of concrete or steel, or green infrastructure of vegetation or a combination of both, how they might tackle specific aspects of climate change and sort of show people through a demonstrative sense that adapting these particular designs might and probably will have a good economic trade-off in, 1 to 5 to 10 years. Another thing I just wanted to make sure I sort of got out there is that the engineering design environment, given that there are these trade-offs between the environment and the economy and the communities that are living in areas that sort of either need to be protected or need to be made more resilient right now, the engineering design space is open for a lot of creativity, because there's this interesting thought experiment where you think of, okay, I want to prevent this particular coastal city or coastal community from flooding. What do I do? The most, I guess, concrete answer that an engineer who wasn't very much thinking about the populace would think about is, well, at some point we should just move everyone back. Get rid of the problem. No more flooding. Very easy. But that's obviously not a solution anyone's going to want to adapt, because you have to consider all the people currently living there, their lives, the communities they've built, the infrastructure and systems that are sort of operating in that space. So that's the extreme example of a solution that would work from an engineering perspective, but not from a societal perspective. And it's our job as engineers who are working in this space to figure out what that middle ground actually is and come up with more and more creative infrastructure solutions that may not have been attempted before, but sort of bridge that gap between society and societal needs and what would basically work from a physical standpoint.
Thanks, Julia. Udit.
Udit, oh, sorry, I'm again muted.
Sure, no worries. Thank you. So I would answer this question in two parts, one from the practitioner perspective and another half from the academician perspective. So if we look at practitioners, I mean, the way we have actually approached this problem of sustainable design and resilient design, we really have no incentive structure built in. So for example, although with advances in these LEED rating or GRIHA rating we have in different countries, at larger scale we have been able to embody that principles of sustainability into certain aspects of infrastructural design. But the incentives are not really clear. Is it just a report card? Is it just a performance card? What it is going to give me in return? And similarly, that has also limited translation of resilience just from a mere buzzword to something that is actionable. And also when we, as an academicians, as engineers, as trainers, when we approach the design, we train our students, when we train future engineers, from very unilateral perspective, that here is a structure, this is what you have to design it for, this is how much wind load it has to resist, this is how much structural load it has to resist, and so on. But we never talk about the uncertainties, we never talk about the multi-purpose utilities, and that is where we see that there is a clear gap, an opportunity as well as challenge to understand that how closely we can bring this trade-off. And as Julia was mentioning, that where is the middle ground? I think there exists a lot of opportunity where we have to think outside our typical codal provisions to bridge this trade-off. I'm not saying that that tomorrow we are going to have another material which is completely, environmental friendly. The carbon footprints of each construction material is going to exist. We can never seize that. So we have to accept that these trade-offs, for example, we can only address to certain extents. But what is the theoretical and practical limits? I think that is where we have to hit the solution so that, the practices improve. And once we have awareness, not only at community level, but also at stakeholder level, also at policy level, that we need incentive structures to be built in that actually encourage and celebrate these kind of best practices going into the engineering design. So that's how I see that the work that we also do at system level integrate into this broader question that was open to the panel. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, I think very nice. Now I invite Arpita to kind of coordinate this
Actually, Ancient, we had planned for 2 more questions actually. I think you might have overlooked the schedule. Yeah. So at least one of them I should ask because that directly spins off from where Udit ended. That is, how do we train our engineers? So this question is posed to Bhanu and Udit, and I'll let Udit speak first. So in your opinion, what educational and pedagogical reforms are necessary in engineering education, and at what levels, in order to consider climate resilience?
Sure. Thanks, Arpita, for this excellent question. So, just like resilience, sustainability, we also talk a lot about interdisciplinarity. So first question we have to really ask ourselves that the kind of challenges that we are talking in this panel, they really spawn across the scale. They really spawn across the disciplines. We have to value a civil engineer alike. We have to value a climate scientist alike, and we have to really value a policy student or somebody studying humanities and social sciences alike. But how many classes at root level do we have that celebrate this true interdisciplinarity? So I know that many institutes, including IIT Bombay, they have been doing phenomenal job in having interdisciplinary PhDs. But I think we have to even go one step back and bring this thinking that engineering is not only about solving the equations. It's not only about solving a deterministic system where you get a point value and you get 10 out of 10 if that value is right versus 0 out of 10 if that point solution is not wrong. So I think that's the first place from where we have to start. So another thing is that as just continuing this particular point is that when we train our students, when our entire education system, I'm not only talking about India, I'm talking about a generic engineering system. It is actually designed to train us in point value thinking. We keep on talking about a lot of uncertainties. Have we really taught our students how to deal with these uncertainties when they are doing an engineering design? What an upper bound would mean, what a lower bound would mean, what are the risks associated if you ignore this, or what are the costs involved if you account for that particular design. So I think unless and until we train the students or modify the education system to actually embrace this uncertainty, not only in practice, but from day one they enter into engineering school or a policy school to think more holistically, rather than thinking themselves as super specialists in designing a beam or a column. I think that is from where I see that we have a gap that ultimately needs to be addressed if we really want to translate these concepts of resilience, sustainability to actually something that is actionable. So I would just give you an example from one of the courses that I took while I was a PhD student at Northeastern University that would bring half policymakers and half engineering students into the class. And we would be given a real world problem that now solve this. And you have to come up with all sort of solutions that a policymaker is looking forward to. So that particular class, for example, really made me realize, really made me appreciate that it's not only about mathematics, it's not only about numbers, it's about thinking the problem the way stakeholder is looking at, and that can only happen in a true interdisciplinary setting, which I would still say would exist at more at graduate level. But I think our educational system needs to also look very carefully the similar changes at undergrad level.
Thank you.
Thanks, Udit. Yes, Bhanu.
Thank you, Arpita. My take will be essentially, I would like to go a little further than what the previous panelists, alluded to. It's not that the new students who are the problem. It's those, who have already graduated and are sitting at different, responsible positions, who are resisting change. In fact, and then there are these new guys, who will join, except for those guys, who are in the academia and enjoy, some level of flexibility. For others, no sooner that you realize, they will start, emulating and following exactly what the others are doing in the system. Many of these engineering design are done based on the manual. How many manuals have you changed in the last, 10 years? Give me a number. I'm not too sure, if IIT Mumbai has been instrumental in changing maybe more than 5 manuals altogether. But, there are several manuals, that, in fact, engineering graduates, will not at all, understand, but, it will be executed by, someone sitting in the accounts department, because there are several specifications that he says, okay, the previous, design essentially involved, like utilizing this type of, say cement. So you'll have to use exactly the same thing. Why, this green design, something that this new guy may go and start to implement, he will be blocked at the first step of his game. So there's a lot that needs to be done to change the existing system, rather than like thinking that the new guys who are coming up. And then I really appreciate the new people who are extremely smart people. And they do understand that, stationary is dead. And they do not, essentially, go back and start, using, a log approach and say that, okay, 200-year return flood is like this and the design standards should be like this. It's not. But still, there is a lot that needs to be done. There are only a few and very handful of universities which are in fact changing. Rest, they already are sold out to the existing system, and they will teach exactly the same thing, which is pleasing to these babus, sitting at different corners of the administration and calling the shot. So the research right now, except for IITs and IISCs, you go to other, maybe, exception will be a few regional engineering colleges, but are NITs now. In the rest, the stochastic hydrology and uncertainties are really taught even at graduate level. So in fact, they're made to think that, okay, this much, cement and that thing like that, and design standards are essentially established, and the professor who may be teaching them will be using a lecture note which he had prepared, in 1985, and has not thought about changing it since. So A-list universities show promise, but their combined effort is also very few and far between. I must say that, sometimes I feel that, even between IITs, and there are several IITs, sitting in the panel there is some kind of, subtle rivalry, and I sometimes see that, excellent, how many papers, we have published in Nature, this and so forth. That does not, necessarily, define what or how much, you have contributed to change the things that get done in the country. Somehow, you will have to, find a way to bring these, excellent forces together, so that maybe together you can do something to find to fight against this establishment which are calling the shot either at like in New Delhi, or I do not want to name a particular institution in different parts. Quite interestingly, we were organizing an excellent monsoon school. Some of you have been lecturer to that one. Do you know that government I will not name who, but it has been stopped. They say that, okay, why, we're spending, a week of young engineers, time and bringing them to around the table and asking them to think, ahead of the game, and saying that, okay, your project implementation should follow, these type of, pathways. And that has now been stopped. So I think, someone should go and tell those, who are designing, new curriculum or training program, to say that, bring back, some of these, interesting things. There should be more of these, interdisciplinary centers, such as that you have at IITs, IIT Mumbai, in all IITs. How many IITs are, amenable to that change? So there is something, that is blocking this pathway. And somehow, I see that, like this pathway is blocked essentially to stop that, the complexity of a coupled human and natural system is not accepted as an engineering reality.
Yeah, so I would say the training of trainers, the issue is raised, but also it's not just that you design, improve, talk about new designs, but there are decision makers who have to pay for it, and what is their concern, and is climate change is one of the many other problems for them, so you need to be able to have, as Udit also said, that we need to convince them, and there may be a middle path sometimes necessary, and that time it is even more critical to be very discerning about what risks we are talking about and what is our risk curve. At what cost, how the risk is falling with cost, and if risk is, somewhat insensitive to cost, then of course one can go all the way. But if it's very sensitive, then one has to look at the risk and damage also. So there are many ways to do this, and even we have to take many other sciences all coming together, like we had, done the digital elevation model for Surat to see how much water can fall on Surat city and which parts of it would be inundated. So that kind of engineering work it requires certain, different types of techniques to do such work, and we say that with so much water, so much will be flooded, this much water, so much will be flooded. We have those curves. So we need to improve our and be very, very adaptive ourselves. And of course, there is no here the age should be such that people should be able to learn from students also, and vice versa. There is some kind of exchange of knowledge, no matter with whom, and especially with other disciplines and other stakeholders, is very essential in this.
Thank you for that input, Dr. Parikh. In fact, I was thinking of extending this question to you, because you have had some experience of working with the government of India. I think we can now open up the floor.
Arpita, one more question is there, as you reminded, that stakeholder input. Do you want that, or we can go to the floor also?
I think the question that I received from one of the attendees is very close to that particular question.
Okay.
So I think I'll open the floor to questions. The first one, this is not in. Thank you. So this is not in any particular order. I'm just looking at one question which is relevant to what we had, Professor Narayanan and I had also planned to ask. One of the attendees, Swati Shinde, who is a PhD student with IIT Bombay. So she has asked if we can give some examples of joint solutions, where a scientific research community has worked with the actual communities in a participatory manner. If we can give some examples, she wants in the urban floods or urban climate hazards context, but really any other context should be fine. So if any panelist would like to talk about such examples.
We have worked in 30 cities of India. In fact, we were Center of Excellence for Urban Development and Climate Change. And we have worked in 3-4 manners. One is the, especially slums, there are no fans and air conditioners, even fans sometimes, and the heat stress becomes very critical there. And we have measured the temperatures there, and minimum and maximum and so on, and we find that they are particularly vulnerable. And knowledge is also missing in simple solutions like making water available, nature-based solutions, more trees and so on. That also helps. But also school materials, school roof. These are smaller engineering, not very expensive, but smaller and inexpensive measures we will have to find. Second we also looked at the school.
Related to schools, but we lost her there. Can anyone hear her? Ensign, can you hear her?
No.
No,
Okay.
I can't.
Okay. Okay, I think I'll then just pass on the question to other members of the panel.
If I may, I think it is she's still speaking. It seems.
Yeah. Oh, you're not hearing me?
No.
No, Dr. Parikh, we lost you there.
You lost?
Yeah,
Oh.
you were, when you started speaking about the second example, you were saying something about schools. So could you repeat that example again?
Yeah, I was saying that we surveyed 45 schools in Surat, and when there was a building wall around the school, it survived much. It had much less problems, and in fact, in some cases nowadays they consider school as a part of resilience measure. People gather there if they are not in low-lying areas, of course. But there are, open areas and so on. And we also said that libraries should be always on the first floor and not on ground floor, because many times they lost the libraries. So these little lessons that we have about how to manage and how to reduce how to smooth function after disaster or even during disaster is simple rules of this type is very essential.
Thank you, Dr. Parikh. Would anyone else in the panel like to add on some other participatory examples?
I can add just very briefly two. One that something that we did in Bangalore, with the support of ITRA. That is an excellent example of people, university, and a service provider, coming together and providing almost real-time information, not only to the farmers, flood-related issues to those people who are impacted by flood. So that has worked really well, and the same model was adapted also in the city of Surat, I think, the same city that Madam Parikh was also talking about. The other example, that I would like to give is something that we call it, creation of virtual observatory. What we have done is, we have started to give farmers in remote areas of Nepal, Peru, Kyrgyzstan, and Ethiopian mountain, and asking them to kind of, generate hydrometeorological information, and we are utilizing that as the basis and triangulating that information with satellite observed, like measurement, and creating various type of as a product that is that the villages of those areas are utilizing. So these are the two examples that I can give. And if you need more information, please write to me. I'll be more than happy to provide.
Thank you very much, Bhanu. We have one question from Gaurav Varatkar. He writes, just curious, are there any large-scale projects that are already in progress or completed which are climate resilient or are mindful of the consequences of the project? So any large-scale project which can act like he writes, like a Bible or great case studies, guides for other projects. So if you can talk about an example or two, would anyone like to share any thoughts on this? So
Arpita, I may add here. So this is based on so this is an ongoing project, and so IIT Gandhinagar was actually involved in advising them on technical fronts. So this is the ongoing construction of Surat Metro, where actually stakeholders reached out to us and mentioned that they would not just rely on the historical flood levels, but they want a good assessment that what 30-year, 50-year, 100-year flood levels would look from climate modeling perspective. And of course, so the intent was there, but when we started addressing this particular problem, we realized that the number of data sets that we have from actual ground, of course, we have these IMD data sets, we have these climate model projections. So there exists a lot of mismatch in the understanding at which stakeholders are expecting the information, and at the level of credibility at which we have this information. But this is one classic example where stakeholders have actually started thinking about climate resilient design and not only designing everything just based on past 30 years or 50 years of data, but want to take into account that what are the worst flood levels would mean for their projects and so on. So this is one good example that I share with even my students in the class whenever they ask that how we translate this climate model into actions.
This is the simulation work I was mentioning. We said, okay, so many billion meter cube of water, or so many, mm cube, whatever is, you can do scenarios twice as much, 3 times as much, and see the inundation levels. And it does not require actual climate prediction, but it says under these circumstances you have this probability. Certainly, actual what is the probability of actually it happening is a matter of interest as well. But at least you can define, delineate vulnerable areas. That this many areas, in fact, so many people were living in low-lying areas. So we also suggested shifting them. Even Srinagar, in fact, luckily we had done the simulation work before Srinagar got inundated, and we were shocked to see that even the municipality offices were on Jhelum Bank. And we were wondering what kind of decision they have taken, and in the next year this happened. So there also people worry about real estate prices and whatnot, but I'm just saying that it is possible to predict some yeah. You heard me?
For most of the part of your answer, we did hear you, but towards the end, I think there were some connectivity issues.
No, I said simulation can help to judge the not fully in detail, but the basic aspect of it would be.
Right. Yeah, that's a point well taken. Professor Manas Behra from IIT Bombay has a question. Sheeba, is it possible to let Professor Manas unmute himself to ask that question? He has a particular question for Bhanu.
Yeah, but I don't see him in the panelists or in the attendees list.
Okay, so he might have been disconnected. So the question he asked was typically the usage of this is pertaining to the point on porous pavement which was raised by Bhanu. Typically, the usage of Indian road might choke the porous pavements in no time, leaving the road as non-porous. Do you think research should happen for site-specific usage? I think a plug-and-play may not work.
I think I 100% agree with that statement. And in fact, like I would have, if she would have said that, okay, what are the examples, whether or not, these porous pavements have been utilized in Indian subcontinent, I would have said exactly the same thing, that more research is definitely needed. I think, Bangalore IISc has started, doing something on this line. I'm not too sure whether or not they have come up with, some good results. so that this technology can be made, mainstreamed in construction. But there is a lot of things, In fact, we see on YouTube videos and so forth, and we get, totally, flabbergasted by that. But bringing those things, we are always, late adapters. We have to be early adapters, or at least if not, we are innovators in all possible sense of the word.
Thanks, Bhanu. Sucharita had a question which actually Deepti has very gracefully answered already. So I'm going to skip that question. The next question is by Joachim Ghosh. And although he has not mentioned the name of any specific panelist, but I think I'll pose this question to Julia. He is asking, can you let me know of any national initiatives? Anyway, perhaps you can tell us about national initiatives in the US for protection of low-lying coastal localities from sea level rise and storm surges. So any national initiatives for protection of low-lying coastal localities?
The answer is there's a lot on paper and not a lot of practice right now. Louisiana is probably one of the better examples of resilience infrastructure that's being put up as we speak, partly because they are hit by a lot of hurricanes fairly frequently, and we still have the lessons from Hurricane Katrina, which flooded New Orleans, to contend with. And that's a combination of rebuilding levee structures, but also, and this is something I learned recently, restoring a lot of the marshland that exists around Louisiana that's been degraded because the Mississippi River has been forced to flow out of the Gulf of Mexico and dump all of its marsh-restoring sediment into the ocean instead of allowing it to recirculate back and rebuild the marshes. So Louisiana is an excellent example of a coastal locale that has an immediate problem that is trying to do something about it. Other instances on the East Coast, Florida is sticking with beach restoration right now with a low-lying and sinking state that tends to have a lot of necessity to maintain beaches, partly because that's part of its tourism industry. So sort of the double effect of by restoring beaches and making them wider, you protect the tourism industry and you give storms a little bit more land to hit before it goes to the buildings and the communities that are behind the beaches. Other parts of the United States are planning to do many things and haven't quite gotten there yet. We have a unique problem, at least from the Dutch perspective when I was teaching students in the Netherlands, which is that we have barrier islands that surround the east coast of the United States. And these are, sand spits that are relatively long, that are exposed to the ocean and have a back bay of water before you hit the continental United States. And in most minds and in the environmental context, these barrier islands are the flood protection for low-lying areas. That's what they're there for. But in the States, we put people on these barrier islands. So it's a bit of an odd trade-off that we are taking what would be a natural protection and making it effectively an issue because we are putting communities there that now need to be protected, possibly by another barrier island, which then also might be resettled. So we're sort of dealing with a trade-off and a back and forth between how we deal with land when it becomes available in the States and how we then best utilize land just for protective purposes and not for settling. And as for other low-lying areas, people have been suggesting living shorelines, offshore breakwaters. There was a large effectively seawall project in Boston that was proposed and then subsequently scrapped, partly because people realized that if you block off the Boston Harbor using a seawall as the storm approaches and as the surge approaches, that water is going to go around the seawall to the low-income and underserved communities that would exist on either side of the seawall. Turns out that's not exactly the ideal solution we were looking for. So Boston has walked back that proposal and are now trying to propose less impactful, less negatively impactful solutions. So a lot on paper, but not a whole lot in practice, except in the regions around the Gulf of Mexico right now.
Wonderful. Thanks, Julia. We have one question from Rishabh Sharma on curriculum approach to follow. Let me share some thoughts on any changes that you brought in your teaching as to bringing climate resilience into your teaching. Any thoughts that you'd like to share?
Yeah, Yeah, thanks, Arpita. So I'm actually currently teaching a course on climate change impact to undergraduate students from various disciplines. I actually have to teach in an hour. So one of the things that I try to do is to bring them perspectives from different communities that are dealing with climate change impacts. I have students focus on projects that involve them trying to either learn about how communities are responding to climate change or how communities are being affected by climate change. And one of the speakers I had last year was a farmer from the Midwest in the U.S. And it kind of speaks to what kind of projects people are doing to build climate resilience. So the Midwestern U.S. has been experiencing severe flooding pretty much every year. And the person I brought in to speak to my class was talking about how they've adapted how they're changing their agricultural practices to make their systems more resilient to climate change. So one of the things they've been doing is incorporating like regenerative agricultural practices, which has the benefit ultimately of helping the farms themselves like deal with flooding, because these kind of regenerative agricultural practices they reduce the amount of flooding that happens when there's heavy precipitation. It increases stormwater absorption, and in addition to that, they have climate benefits because the regenerative agricultural practices they help trap more soil carbon, and so it kind of has climate benefits as well as builds climate resilience, especially to the flooding events that happen. And then the other thing that they've been doing to build resilience is reduce their dependency on fossil fuels and incorporate more windmills and solar-based sources of energy for their farms. And the person I brought in spoke, provided all this really important information to the class, and also talked about initiatives that he has with other Midwestern farmers to try to incorporate similar practices and help build resilience to flooding. And ultimately, these regenerative practices, even though they're designed for, at least he designed it, keeping in mind the flooding events that happen, it also helps them when droughts occur. And so I think it's kind of a great example of how communities are building resilience, even without any national or regional level initiatives, because it makes sense for them. And so I try to expose my students to these kind of projects that are happening from an engineering perspective and design perspective, as well as from a policy perspective. So that's what I try to do.
Wonderful. Right. Now we'll take from Suman Dhamala, who's an MTech student here at IIT Bombay. He's actually from Nepal. So he's asking what kind of incentives should we provide to enable people to make sustainable choices instead of irrelevant or economically viable choices. So what sort of incentives should governments or other agencies and authorities provide? I think, Udit, you had at one point mentioned about, incentivizing this. So would you like to share some thoughts on that and respond to the question?
Yeah, certainly, Arpita. So I think, so the one thing that to incentivize people at a level at which we are talking is community level. And the first thing that would come to my mind would be like, let us say that giving subsidies in implementing certain aspects. For example, you might have seen that whenever somebody goes for installation of a solar panel in city like Ahmedabad, government would say that if you purchase 2 panels, 1 panel is coming from our side. And I think that has really encouraged a lot of people to put these solar panels on top of their houses, and which is a classic example of building sustainability into already existing infrastructure. So second thing is that specifically in context of India, there is very less to no awareness about the insurance that people need to buy for their houses. For example, even if you are living in a low-lying coastal areas, people and community members would be generally very hesitant to go out and get their properties insured because they don't understand the risk of that. So one way to incentivize that kind of thinking is that for 1 year or 2 years, this is the insurance premium that we are covering. And God forbid that every time when flood happens in Mumbai, we see that the losses that it brings to the communities. Once these communities realize the importance of having these kind of insurance products, protecting their community, protecting the infrastructure that exists in their areas, I think that is going to add a lot of awareness. And I think these could be good starting point. And finally, as a PhD student, I got a chance to visit Indonesia with some undergraduate students from Northeastern. And there we met certain communities which are living on side of the river. And they are trying their best to keep the river clean because government has actually put some this small incentives that if you keep this river clean and the risk of flooding is going to get minimized, and then you are going to get some special privileges to use that water. So I think the connection has to be two ways. It cannot be just an imposition that you do that and job is over. So communities have to realize what's the immediate benefit that I'm going to reap in tomorrow to address this problem, which may have to be addressed on much longer time scale. So this is what I think about incentivization.
Thank you, Udit. Yeah, that brings me to the point I think Julia was also making about incorporating economic models into impacts and, really showing what investment where would lead to what kind of benefits. Anyway, with that, I think we have had an excellent and stimulating discussion. I think I'll pass the baton back to NCN. If you could summarize the discussion and tell us about the future steps, it would be great. So NCN, over to you.
Thank you, Arpita. So I thought, what I will do is I'll pick up some threads here to see, what we have in IIT and, what IDPCS can do to kind of address some of these concerns. I think I flagged some points so that it can be discussed. Technical improvements in modeling, I think IDPCS is already a leader in that, and how can we further take it forward is one question. Especially civil, water engineering, remote sensing studies, energy studies. I think, we have these. So one of the suggestions was that, putting in physical models into economic models to understand the trade-offs, and then look at engineering designs. And what about the societal perspectives? How do we bridge this? It's the challenge of interdisciplinarity. I think, that's one discussion that we had, because there are demands of knowledge systems that has to answer these questions. But how are we going to kind of bridge these? I think there are further ones, like technical questions of arriving energy mix. This needs bridges with ongoing energy science studies, energy efficiency, renewable energy, behavioral change, questions of affordable energy, access to water, and those kinds of resources. I think, those are another, range of questions. We also stressed on the important issue of urban planning, bylaws, building codes, like storm drainage systems and urban flood proofing. So we need bridges with urban studies, which also we have, and particularly issues of urban poor, because more than 50% of Indian cities are constituted by them. Mobility is an important issue which are not kind of touched here. I think stress on public transport will be, one important issue, and we already have the kind of, transport in civil engineering. What are the specific issues of rural areas? Are we thinking that urbanization is an inevitable, or going to plan to deepen production and livelihood systems in rural areas, which is also one way of, decongesting cities, and, then hazards, unequal access and inequality, adaptive management of hazards with this challenge in mind. Need to be adaptive design. What was told was, can we iteratively go back and design with newer demands, with more nature-inspired designs? I think, IDC and, we should have bridges with those departments. inequality and climate change, the majority of the world, technical advances are there in modeling and all. So citizen science has improved. How can all this lead to new engineering designs that are more inclusive? So citizen science can actually kind of give us large amounts of data from the ground, and after modeling can this kind of go back to the same routes so that, contextually relevant, technologies and institutional models can be developed. Digital transformations is a major area which we cannot kind of avoid at all. I think Center for Policy Studies is planning to look at it. How can engineering education be made real world? Looking at the problems in context was an important question that was asked. Also, how can we influence the practices like working on age-old manuals and bringing in more kind of, climate-informed, changes in that. For all this, I think, the major one is pedagogical challenges to bridge these, kind of knowledge systems, which are now kind of disciplines in a way. So an interdisciplinary center, like climate change, how can we do that? Is it a list of courses only? Or are there points of coincidence and spaces for dialogue that we can put in place for further discussions in IDPCS? I think that's the challenge that I think we should take it up now. I again thank all the panelists who participated in this webinar. And if I think Arpita has something, she can come in. Otherwise, I would invite Professor Subimal and Professor Raaj for the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Over to you, Professor Subimal and Professor Raaj.
Subimal, you are muted.
Yeah, thank you everyone for this, for joining the panel discussion, and it was really a stimulating discussion. And I'm sure that, all our students and faculty members and all those who have attended, they are extremely benefited by your opinion and your views on this specific topic. Now, over to you, Raj, for the formal vote of thanks.
So, first of all, I'd like to thank you all the panelists and panelists for accepting our invitation for this panel discussion on climate resilient design. So thank you, Professor Bhanu, Neupane, Dr. Jyoti Parikh, Dr. Deepti Singh, and Professor Julia Hopkins and Professor Udit, Bhatia. And I also like to thank Professor Subimal Ghosh, the convener IDPCS, who has suggested this idea, and also the two hosts, Professor C Narayanan and Professor Arpita Mondal, for framing nice questions, stimulating questions to all the panelists. And also like to thank the Ms. Sheeba Sekharan, who has helped us in preparing the brochures and other publicity activities. Last but not least, I'd like to thank the audience also, the attendees. We have nearly more than 100 registrations, but finally I think there are 70 to 80 people have attended. Now there are only 30 people are there. I thank all of them and really enjoyed the discussions, because a lot of discussions over there related to the climate design, how to improve the designs by considering the climate change, as well as the ideas for improving the curriculum, introducing the interdisciplinary concepts also. Thank you very much. And I request all of you to switch on your camera just for take a photograph before closing the session, including the attendees. Yeah, Sheeba, you can take the photo.
Yeah, Professor Karmakar and Tejasvi, both of you can
yes,
switch on your video.
Can we also see some smiles?
Taken, huh? Click that. Yeah. So thank you all. I see you again in some other panel discussions. Thank you. See you and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Deepti and Julia, because it's really early morning for you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having us. And thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhanu. Thanks to this. Thank you. Thanks everyone. Thanks, Arpita, Professor. Thank you very much.
Bye.